if you're choosing tools correctly, you should be choosing tools that are going to grow with you and not just that let you get over this little hump right now. I think it's perfectly OK to start thinking about, OK, well, sure, this tool will handle 1 million rows, but what about 100 million? What about 100 billion? Right? I think it's perfectly fine to analyze those problems early on, because when they start to become a problem for you is at the point they become a problem, that tool can become intractable and it can take years sometimes to switch off of. So be careful about that tool choice. Have some hubris. Think you're going to succeed. And once again, monitoring is absolutely critical. You're going to make a whole bunch of assumptions right at the beginning without any data. You're just going to guess wildly, and you're going to be wildly wrong. And only with good monitoring tools are you going to know just how wrong you are and in what ways you're wrong. Do you guys follow the Foursquare outage? I love reading postmortems. One of the best ways to learn how to be a good operations engineer is to read postmortems. I'm secretly thrilled every time GitHub goes down, because they write such good postmortems of their downtime. I feel guilty, but man, I look forward to it every time. Well, so Foursquare went down one day, and a lot of people like to blame it on MongoDB. And there's some blame to be assigned to MongoDB. But what really happened was Mongo, like pretty much every database out there, stores its working set in RAM. And when RAM runs out, it starts swapping. And rule 1 of operations work is don't let the computer swap. Whatever happens, just don't let it swap. It's, the performance just falls right off a cliff. And what had happened was they were running on these big machines with 64 gigs of RAM, and they were going, 64 gigs should be plenty for anyone. And their working set exceeded their RAM, and the machine started swapping. One very simple tool that graphed their RAM consumption over time would have shown a clear upward trajectory and could have projected that line to maybe not the date, but at least probably pretty close to the date that would happen. You need to be you need to be watching these numbers. You need to be planning for your capacity. You need to be going, oh, in 3 weeks, we're going to run out of RAM. Because then you can upgrade and reshard and rebalance and complain about that bug in MongoDB you've discovered, whatever it is. But once your site goes down, you're not going to be able to have the leisure to do any of that right. Once again, I hope none of this really came as much of a surprise to anyone, right? This is kind of all stuff that we've learned as developers, right? We value data, we gather performance, we know that we have to be pragmatic about our tool choice, we architect systems to grow. We understand these things. So I want to leave you, sort of to recap. As you become a DevOps engineer, and you're all DBAs now too, so you're going to become operations engineers as well. It's just going to happen. It's going to be merged into what we think of as the role of a developer. So I want to leave you with a recap of how I think we can all deploy like developers. We can practice safe development, source control, no live changes on the server, refactoring, unit testing once people start to figure that out. Again, we know this stuff. Take the same things you know about writing good code and start applying it to your configuration. Whatever you can, try not to repeat yourself. If you set up a server and you recognize that you're doing something again, figure out a way to automate that. I like Chef, it's a good choice, but find something that works well for you. Remember that there's no silver bullet here, right? Evaluate your tools very carefully. Make sure that you know that they're going to grow with you, that you know that they're going to work correctly, and that they're going to handle your particular needs. I think that's the most succinct definition of DevOps I can give. Simply that every site is different, and that our operations information, what we need for operations, needs to change based on our underlying code. That's sort of the best way that I can describe what DevOps really means. And finally, keep in mind this concept that nobody's special. Really do everything you can to make sure that everyone in your organization can use these tools the same as you can. You should be able to stand up and walk out, and the site should be able to keep running without you. Thank you. I'll take a few questions in a sec, but I want to abuse my standing up here to give you a shameless plug. I'm teaching a couple of classes on one on deployment actually, and then one on some tools from the Django ecosystem. Oh, and they're not actually up there. There they are. Here in LA, actually, just down the road at Coloft. That way, whatever. I don't know which way I'm facing. Close. It's just a few blocks away here at Coloft, and that's the 6th and 7th. There's a little discount code if anyone wants to come. If you have more questions, let's not do it now because most people here aren't going to be interested. But find me once I stop taking questions, and I can give you plenty more information about these classes. And you should come. They'll be fun. And this is how to get in touch with me. And I'll take a couple of questions, and then we'll go get beer.
Sounds good. Jeff, you first.
Okay.
Oh.
So you mentioned continuous integration earlier, but didn't really talk about it too much. I did some looking probably like 6 or 9 months ago for tools for continuous integration.
For CI for actual deployment work, you mean?
Yeah.
Or for CI for code?
For code.
Oh, for code, okay.
And we ended up going with Hudson because it's got everything you could possibly ever imagine. Do you know of any other good stuff? I mean, so it's kind of also for deployment as well, because I've heard of people using it, Hudson specifically for actually tying it into when they commit, it runs the testing suite, if it succeeds, it goes live.
Yeah, so right, I mean that's one cool way that you can use CI tools is you run your tests automatically when, and then have some sort of automatic go live as a consequence of passing. I'm sure Hudson can do that. Hudson is a good tool and tends to be pretty highly recommended, and I think it's a good choice. I've recently been doing a bunch of work with BuildBot, which is someone in IRC called it the Gen 2 of continuous integration tools, which I think is a pretty apt description. It's really complicated. You have to build everything yourself, but it's really complicated, and you get to build everything yourself. So it's a trade-off there. I would say if Hudson works, it's a pretty good tool. I was actually specifically talking about this idea of like, why can't we get CI for our deployment infrastructure? I'm experimenting with this on one stack that I run, where we have a copy of our deployment stack as a dev stack, same number of servers, but all much smaller instances, so that we can sort of save money. And we'd sort of do a deployment every time we do a commit to the configuration, to the chef config. It gets deployed out to those servers first, and we run kind of like some simple web spiders against it, and then use that as sort of a status board. It's not really, you know, it's not unit testing, right? You're like pushing this huge ball of configuration at a cluster of servers and then testing that a web page works. It doesn't really get you that level of detail that you'd want out of a good testing setup. And I have to expect that this sort of stuff is coming. As it gets cheaper and easier to spin up new machines, I don't see why we couldn't spin up a machine, run a bunch of assertions against that machine, and then shut it down. So that was what I was referring to. But yeah, good.
And with Chef, are you using Chef Solo or Chef Server? And one or the other, why would you choose?
So I don't use the whole server. So Chef can run, but both Chef and Puppet can either run in a standalone mode where they just run on the machine and they read the configuration and you know do their thing, or they can work in a master server and a master slave thing where there's a master server that has all the configuration and it pushes it out to the to the individual nodes on some regular basis. I find the server stuff to be hugely overkill for. So Google uses Puppet to manage the deployment of their desktop stack across the entire campus, right? Like tens of thousands of machines. I can't imagine doing that one at a time, right? But so I just use Fabric to trigger Chef Solo on all of my machines, and I only use the single part of it because my biggest deployment stacks are in the dozens, right? I don't see the point of this complicated client-server setup, and plus the Chef server, almost impossible to get running.